Aloha everyone, and welcome to part 2 in my shipbuilding series, when today we're going to take a look at Bridge Officer cooldown reduction, or to be a bit more specific, methods to maximize the uptime of the abilities you really care about. I have 3 methods for you today. The first method is for budget players, especially those using the level 40 ship you were given for free, as they have a large amount of redundancy in their seating. Method number 1 requires you to run duplicates of all the really important abilities that you want. And in doing so, you can simply alternate them to get the same effect as if you had maximum cooldown reduction, as activating the first ability will set all of the duplicates on a global cooldown. When that one finishes, you simply activate the duplicate copy, causing the first copy to go to its global cooldown. And it's important to note that it does set the ability to its global. So even if the cooldown was lower than that, it will go to the global. And let me just demonstrate that for you really quickly here, which sometimes is bad, but sometimes it's good. I have 2 copies of Tactical Team 1 here. Now I do have a small amount of Bridge Officer cooldown reduction from my skill tree. If you watched the last video, you'll know I have 1 point in each of the readiness skills, and there's no way for me to turn that off, but all other sources of cooldown reduction have been removed for the moment. I'm going to activate the first one here, and you'll see that it goes to a 30-second cooldown, but the second copy, right to the right of it, went to a 15-second cooldown. And when that one's finished, we'll click on it, and it will set the first copy to 15 seconds. And you'll notice that actually the first copy was already to 12 seconds when we activated the second one, but the first one went back up to 15. So it does set the cooldown of your other abilities. It doesn't just lower them. It actually replaces whatever the current cooldown was with the global. And so in doing that, you simply alternate back and forth. And for example, with Tactical Team, you would go from a 1/3 uptime to a 2/3 uptime, since the ability lasts for 10 seconds. Now that's method number 1. So how do you use it? Well, if you have a ship with a lot of redundant seating, say a commander and a lieutenant commander of the same type, commander, engineering, tactical science, all you have to do is just mirror, your ensign, lieutenant, and lieutenant commander ability from your captain seat onto your lieutenant commander seat, and now those 3 abilities can all have roughly maximum uptime simply by alternating them. Okay, method number 2. Well, actually, let's go back a moment, talk about the strengths and weaknesses of method number 1. Method number 1 is extremely cheap. You can do it almost immediately with no budget. All you need is the training manuals, which are very easy to obtain. And it doesn't require you to tinker with any other parts of your build. You don't need any special duty officers. You don't need any special consoles or reputation traits or anything like that. You can pretty much do it immediately. It has a small footprint everywhere except for your bridge officer seating. The big drawback to it is that it reduces the number of unique bridge officer abilities that you can use. And so it's the most appropriate on ships where you didn't really have that flexibility anyway. Okay, moving on to method number 2. You have a tier 6 ship. You want more unique bridge officer abilities, but you don't want to use the first method, so what do? Well, you can use auxiliary to battery if you don't need auxiliary power, because auxiliary to battery will drain your aux power. However, despite this weakness, it is the best and most powerful cooldown reduction method in the game. What do you need? Well, you're going to need 2 copies of auxiliary to battery. This can either be aux to bat 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't matter. Usually if you have a couple of different engineering seats, you'll want to do aux to bat 1 on each one. But if you only have a commander engineering seat, you can do aux to bat 1 in the lieutenant seat and aux to bat 3 in the commander seat, preserving your lieutenant commander seat for either aux to weapons or emergency power to weapons or emergency power to auxiliary. So I have my 2 aux to bat abilities right down here, and this is what I usually use for the ship you see here. We're going to go into our duty officers, roster, active space, come down here, find technicians. Now preferably you're going to want the highest quality you can get, because it's going to reduce the cooldown of your bridge officer abilities the most. I have a couple of purple ones here that will give 10% each, and I've got a blue one here which will give 8%, for a total of 28% every time I activate auxiliary to battery. Okay, so now that we have our duty officers set, let's go ahead and look at our attack team again. So I click it, 28, I click aux to bat, it goes from 28 to 19. When the other copy of aux to bat is available, I'll click it, and we're going to go from roughly 9 to 4 seconds on that cooldown. Click it again, and now we're at about 4 seconds. And you can see, I don't know if you could see there, but the original copy caught up to the duplicate copy right there at the end. So we were able to achieve the same results as the method number 1 with only one copy of TAC Team 1. And the real power of this is that even though we're only using 2 copies of auxiliary to battery, the cooldown will apply to all of our other bridge officer abilities. So if you have 13 bridge officer abilities on your ship, you use 2 of them for aux to bat, you can have 11 unique bridge officer abilities left over that will all have their cooldown reduced to its global. It is extremely powerful and effective, but it does drain your aux power. So if you're using a science ship or any other ship where you want a science as a secondary focus, or you just need aux power for some reason, then this method is not going to work for you. So if method number 1 is not appropriate, method number 2, aux to bat, is not appropriate because you need your aux power, then you're going to have to go to method number 3, which is the most expensive and the messiest, but it does circumvent the weaknesses of the first 2 methods. Sometimes people call this the Kraken because it's death by 1,000 tentacles. You get a little bit of cooldown reduction from a lot of different sources, and it all adds up to get you across the finish line. However, some of the sources of this cooldown reduction can be quite expensive or difficult to obtain. The first thing we're going to do is switch out our duty officers. This is a very comprehensive method in the sense that it requires you to find sources in lots of different places in your build. Duty officers, consoles, starship traits, personal traits, reputation traits, etc. So we're going to remove our aux to bat officers. And what I would recommend is getting 2 damage control engineers. I've got a couple of purple ones here. Oh, sorry, I still had technicians selected. Give me a second. Here we go, there's my damage control. And they will have a 35% chance to reduce the time on emergency power abilities by 30%, which is what you would want. So emergency powered weapons, emergency powered shields, engines, and auxiliary. Then we're going to get a con officer, for example, and I've got a blue one here. My purple one is on a duty officer assignment, and he will reduce the recharge time on TAC team. That's not a chance, it's a flat out reduction. Now, that's just one small part. It's a very small source of cooldown for a couple of our abilities. We're going to need more. Let's come over to the ship here. We've got a couple of console slots. Now these used to have consoles in them that I really wanted to use, but since I need the cooldown reduction, we're going to have to choose some other consoles. And what I have here is the Bio Neural Gel Pack, and this is from Reputation. Okay, and that's going to give you 7% cooldown reduction on bridge officer abilities. I have the Defense Guardian drones. That's another 7.5%. These run for about several million on the exchange, and they come from the Infinity Lockbox salvaged console. So they're relatively common, and they're probably not going anywhere. That's going to give us a little bit more. We've got 10% for each engineering, science, and tactical in our skill tree from 1 point in each readiness skill. Other sources that you can get. Deflectors can have a science cooldown reduction modifier on them. The prevailing engines can either give you engineering or science cooldown. You can get those on there. Chrono bridge officers are extremely expensive. They come in 2 flavors, engineering or science bridge officer cooldowns. And the next thing, there's also clickies. For example, this is the temporally phased overcharged warp core. It comes from the mission Butterfly, so it's very easy to get. And it has a 4-minute clicky that gives you 50% bridge officer ability recharge time for 30 seconds. There is a science ability called Photonic Officer, available at Lieutenant through Commander, that has roughly the same effect that this does, except that it's on a 2-minute cooldown instead of a 4-minute cooldown. But the I don't like that because it does leave you with a gap. It only has about a 50% uptime on it. And also the new Constable specialization is going to have some bridge officer cooldown in it. The TAC Ultimate has an option to give you some bridge officer cooldown. But I try to avoid the options that give you a variable amount or which are inconsistently activated. I like a surefire thing. So let's look at traits. And for that, we're going to have to leave because we can use our abilities here, but we can't change our traits. So we're going to have to go to sector space for a moment. One of the important reputation traits for doing bridge officer cooldown is Chrono Capacitor Array, and you get that from being tier 2 in the temporal reputation. So we're going to go here to our reputation. Oh, not there, I'm sorry. Traits. Space reputation. I have the slot free just for this occasion. Come down to the temporal ones. Chrono Capacitor Array, that's another 7.5%. Starship Traits, there are a couple of options here. The two that I would recommend, since this method is most appropriate for science ships, All Hands on Deck comes from the Tactical Command Battlecruiser line, and that will give you 10% on science and 5% on captain when you use tactical abilities. So that's the most affordable option. The VOMF Dreadnought Carrier used to be much more affordable, but now that they've changed the way the Infinity lockboxes work, it's not as affordable as it used to be, but that comes with peak efficiency, and that's my preferred option since I have it. That's another 7.5 for all bridge officer abilities every 5 seconds that your hull is at or above 80%. Now, with all of these combined, I am Captain Planet, but no, peak efficiency, Chrono Capacitor Array, the Bioneural Gel Pack, the Guardian drones, and the duty officers, all of that combined will bring us roughly in line with what method number 1 and method number 2 would have given us in terms of cooldown. But we had to make a lot of sacrifices in order to get it. 2 console slots, 3 duty officer slots, a starship trait, and a space reputation trait. If you don't want to make all of those trade-offs, you could try and do the Chrono duty officers, or perhaps doing the engines or the deflector, but in every case you're probably going to be using something. Any of these options are usually a little bit suboptimal compared to what you might want to use instead, but you're choosing these to get that bridge officer cooldown. So again, just to recap, method number 1, if you have no budget but a lot of redundant seating on your ship, simply run duplicates of your abilities and activate them in tandem. It's cheap and it's effective. Method number 2, get 2 copies of Aux to Bat, provided you don't need auxiliary power for your ship, and get 3 technician duty officers, the best quality you can find, and they will reduce your bridge officer cooldowns so you can have more unique bridge officer abilities and still get the full reduction from method number 1. Method number 3, if you want more unique bridge officer abilities, you don't have the redundant seating, and you need auxiliary power, method number 3 is for you. Just find lots of small ways to reduce your bridge officer cooldowns and use them all, and that should get you across the finish line. Well, I hope that this has been instructive and helpful to some of you. If you like the video, you can hit the like button and subscribe so you can see more videos from me in the future, but you don't have to. Please leave any suggestions, comments, or feedbacks in the comments below so I can make better content for all of you. Until next time, have a great day.